Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. Before I tell this story, here's what I learned about breaks during grief. Vague rules are not compassionate. They are convenient. When someone says, "I need space to test our love," listen for what they do not say: boundaries, accountability, and a plan to return. I ignored those missing pieces because I was tired and ashamed of how numb I had become after my father died. I thought endurance was love. It is not. Love has structure. Love shows up even when life hurts. I keep a notebook for signal faults. That week I use it to track red flags. In my case, the grief was quiet. Casseroles after the funeral, then silence, then work. My wife, Kendra, said she felt alone beside me, like living next to a locked door. I heard her, but I kept promising after this project, like time was a refund. The red flag was not her frustration. It was her solution. She wanted a break with no rules, and she framed it as growth. By day 7, she was with her ex, and I learned the difference between patience and permission. If you are grieving, protect your heart and your finances at once. If you have ever been asked to take a break with no rules, listen closely, because the details you ignore in the beginning become the damage you pay for later. While you're watching, tell me this in the comments. Is a break ever real love or just permission? Late November in Milwaukee, the kind of cold that turns your breath into proof. I am Malcolm Satterfield, 42, a rail signal engineer for the county transit line. I fix blinking failures before commuters notice, and I drink chamomile like it is a switch I can flip. 3 months after my father's burial in a South Side church, my apartment still smelled like hymnals and wet coats. Kendra sat across from me at a corner diner, stirring coffee until the spoon clicked against the cup. She watched hands, waiting for me to look up and come back. Kendra folded her napkin into a tight square, a habit she had when she rehearsed speeches for donor dinners. "I am not leaving you," she said, voice careful. "I am asking for a break. 2 weeks, to test whether we still choose each other." I stare at the laminated menu, like it could translate grief into instructions. "A break, how?" I asked. Separate spaces. No rules. No checking. We meet after and decide. Outside, a bus hissed at the curb, doors opening and closing like a warning. I nodded anyway. I hated how relieved she looked then. Later, we married 5 years ago in a park near the lakefront, late summer, her laugh bright as the brass band. Kendra ran community events for a children's hospital and kept color-coded sticky notes on the fridge. I collected old radios from estate sales and fixed them in the basement, solder smoke mixing with her rosemary candles. When Dad got sick, she drove me to appointments and learned the names of medications like they were co-workers. After the funeral, I started answering life with one-word replies. She asked for warmth. I offered silence and overtime. Too often, we drew up the break, like we were roommates negotiating a lease. She would stay in our duplex in River West. I would take my tools and a week of clothes to my sister Renee's place in Wauwatosa. Kendra said she needed quiet. I told myself I was giving it. On my way out, I noticed she had already cleared a shelf in the bathroom cabinet, empty space shaped like a decision made earlier. I carried my radio parts in a shoebox, hearing wind rattle the porch light. She didn't kiss me goodbye, just a nod at most. Night. Renee's house smelled like fried catfish and eucalyptus, 2 scents that never belonged together until her. She is older, blunt, a postal supervisor who irons uniforms the way some people pray. When I told her about the break, she pressed her lips flat. "No rules is a rule," she said. "It is a rule that favors the bold." I wanted to defend Kendra, so I talked about stress, about grief, about how I had been hard to live with. Renee slid me a plate and turned the radio low. "Still," she said, "watch what she does." I kept the promise of silence like a penance. No texts, no drive-bys, no late-night checking. I went to my barbershop off Fond du Lac Avenue and asked for a simple lineup, nothing sharp enough to look like a new man. The clippers buzzed, Sports talk filled the air, and I realized I've been avoiding people who might ask how I was. Afterward, I rode the green line back, watching snow gather on stop signs. I drafted a message to Kendra, just checking in, and deleted it. I told myself this restraint proved love. It mostly proved fear. At work, my foreman asked if I could cover an overnight test near the stadium. I said yes. Busy felt safer than conversation. During a break, my coworker Jamal nudged me. "Your wife is still doing hospital galas." His phone showed Kendra in a velvet blazer, smiling beside a man from Old Stories. Jalen Cross, her college ex. My throat tightened. Jamal kept scrolling, unaware. "They raise a lot," he said. Kendra had told me the fundraiser would be staff only. I swallowed questions and stared into the open signal cabinet, pretending wires were easier than betrayal. Today, night, I lay on Renee's couch, the ceiling fan clicking like a metronome. I told myself a picture meant nothing. Kendra knew Jalen from the past. Fundraisers were public. Still, she had not mentioned him, and that omission felt heavier than any caption. Grief makes you easy to deceive because you assume pain is coming from one place. I replayed our diner conversation, the words "no rules" echoing behind her careful smile. In the morning, I would not confront her. I would gather facts like I do at work. That thought made me feel cold and relieved. Sunday came with snow. I went to my father's church alone and slid into the back pew. The choir warmed up, shoes squeaking on polished wood, and my chest tightened at familiar harmonies. After service, Pastor Lau clasped my shoulder and asked about Kendra. I said, "We are taking space." His eyes stayed kind but alert. "Space can heal," he said, "or it can hide." I nodded, unable to explain how tired I was of being strong. Walking to my car, I admitted something new. I missed my marriage, but not the version of myself inside it. I met my friend Terrence at a diner near the river, booths smelling like syrup and bleach. Terrence teaches history and talks like every sentence matters. He asked, "How is Kendra?" I told him about the break. His fork paused. "I saw her last night," he said, "at a jazz lounge downtown. She was with Jalen." Embarrassment hit first, then anger at myself for feeling it. "Were they?" I started. Terrence exhaled. "They left together." I paid without tasting my food and drove through slush, headlights cutting the dark like a lie detector. My hands shook, turning. I broke my own rule because the mailbox key was on my ring. I drove to the duplex at dusk. Snow falling. Kendra's car was out front, and beside it an SUV. I told myself it could be a coworker. Then the door opened, and Kendra stepped onto the porch in my hoodie, laughing. Jalen followed, hands on her waist, kissing her temple like normal. My stomach hollowed, but my face stayed still. I did not knock. I did not call. I walked back to my car and wrote one sentence. Day 7. She chose him. Today. Later. I sat in a grocery lot, listening to carts clatter over ice. My first impulse was to call and scream. The second was to beg. I did neither. I drove to Renee's and asked for her table. I changed my direct deposit to my personal account and printed the last 6 months of statements. It felt cold, and I resented needing a cold. At 11:18 p.m., I texted Kendra one line. "The break is over. So is marriage. We will communicate through counsel." I turned my phone face down before a reply could reach me. Tonight, my phone lit up, missed calls and a voicemail. Kendra sounded offended. "Malcolm, you are being dramatic. This was a break. You agreed." I listened and saved it. Evidence is not revenge. It is clarity. Renee watched me pace and said, "You look steady, but your eyes are tired." I admitted I had not slept. I kept seeing Kendra in my hoodie, laughing. Part of me wanted an explanation. Another part remembered the kiss. That afternoon, I met a lawyer recommended by Renee. Her name was Dana Whitaker, and she spoke like a metronome. Slow, precise, unavoidable. Dana Whitaker scanned my notes without judging my hands. She asked 3 questions. Do you have children? Any shared business? Any safety concerns? No, No, and not physical, I said, only the kind that erodes dignity. Dana, explain Wisconsin's process, the waiting periods, the value of documenting communication. You can be kind without being accessible, she said. Boundaries are not punishment. She gave me a checklist, separate accounts, change passwords, inventory property, and decide where you will live. I left her office carrying papers that weighed less than my wedding ring, but felt heavier than a toolbox. Kendra arrived at Renee's, eyes bright with practiced certainty. I came to talk, she said. Not through lawyers. We can talk after papers are filed. I replied. Her jaw tightened. You are punishing me for asking for space. I am responding to what I saw. I said, Day 7. Jalen, my hoodie. Silence landed, sharp as ice. Kendra swallowed. It was complicated. It was simple, I said. You chose. She stepped closer. Please, Malcolm. I stayed still. Please respect the boundary you asked for first. Renee opened the door, ending the scene before my voice could shake. Night. Kendra texted a long message that tried to be tender and strategic at once. She wrote that she never meant to hurt me, that Jalen showed up when she felt invisible, that she still loved me. She ended with, Can we restart after your grief passes? I stared at the screen, ashamed of how much I wanted to say yes. Instead, I forwarded it to Dana and saved screenshots. Then I stepped into the cold and called my father's old voicemail greeting. I did not speak. I just listened until my throat stopped tightening. For once, Dana advised an inventory, so I went to the duplex while Kendra was at work, with Renee as witness. The living room looked staged, like my absence was a design choice. My radio shelf was half empty. Our wedding photo was turned face down on the mantel. In the kitchen, a grocery list had my name crossed out beside eggs. Renee snapped pictures while I packed essentials, tools, my father's watch, and the quilt my aunt made. I left the rest because I did not trust myself to touch sentiment without falling apart. Snow squeaked under my shoes. The first consequence arrived as numbers. Our joint card showed a hotel charge in Chicago, 2 nights. Kendra had not asked or warned. She had simply used what was shared. I called the bank, separated accounts, and requested new cards. Doing that made me feel petty, until Dana reminded me that shared money is shared liability. That evening, Kendra emailed from her work address, subject line, Please stop. In the body, she wrote, You are making this ugly. I typed one sentence, deleted it, then sent nothing. Silence was my last form of dignity. I breathed slowly. 2 mornings later, I rode the bus along the lakefront and watched water slap the rocks. Grief had trained me to accept discomfort as normal, so betrayal tried to rent the same space in my chest. I refused. At a coffee shop downtown, I changed every password that mattered, including the shared streaming account Kendra loved, because small closures help your mind accept a larger one. My hands stayed steady, but my stomach felt hollow. I kept seeing my hoodie on Jalen's shoulders in the porch light, like my life had been reassigned. I wrote it down, then breathed slowly. Dana filed a temporary separation agreement that afternoon, not as drama, as a doorstop. It covered the mortgage payment, utilities, and what counted as ordinary spending. The clerk at the courthouse slid papers under glass, and the fluorescent lights made everything look flat. I kept thinking about how quickly a marriage becomes case numbers. Outside, snowplows scraped the street. Dana said, Do not explain yourself more than once. I nodded, because grief had already taught me that some people only listen long enough to twist your words. Leaving, I bought a warm pretzel and tasted salt as a final fact right then. Kendra's first response arrived through email, copied to Dana even though she pretended it was personal. She wrote that the break was meant to reset us and that I was spiraling. She offered a dinner meeting at the same diner where she asked for space, as if location could rewind behavior. Dana told me to avoid private meetings until mediation. I want to tell Kendra my father died, and I was learning how to live without cushioning. But the truth was simpler. I would not compete with another man for my own marriage. I replied once politely and closed my laptop. Terrence called that evening and asked if I was eating. I said I was fine, which meant I had forgotten to be human. He said Kendra was telling people we were taking space while Malcolm works through grief. It sounded compassionate, but it put me in the role of an unstable husband and her in the role of patient caretaker. That version of events would make her choices look reasonable. I thanked Terrence and asked him not to argue with anyone on my behalf. I would not trade stories. I would sign papers and tell the truth once. When asked calmly, the next shift, Jamal cornered me by the signal shed and lowered his voice. Someone at the depot had seen Kendra and Jalen together again, this time at a brunch spot near Walker's Point. Jamal looked embarrassed for me, which stung worse than the news. I told him not to carry my shame for me. On the ride back, the train bell rang at each crossing, steady and indifferent. I realized Kendra was not hiding anything, because the break gave her cover. My boundary was the only thing left that belonged to me. That settled it. Today, Kendra came to my office building during lunch, wearing the calm face she used for donors. Reception called because she insisted it was urgent. I asked them to tell her I was unavailable and to email my attorney. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a picture of our wedding band set on my desk at home. Like bait, she texted, "You are making a mistake." My chest tightened, but I recognized a pattern. Provoke, then blame my reaction. I walked to the vending machine, bought crackers, and ate them slowly, forcing my body to remember routine. No more debates. I stayed steady. Renee and I spent a Saturday doing an inventory, room by room, like inspectors. She read items aloud while I photographed them. Couch, table, the frame print Kendra loved, my toolbox, my father's record player. In the hall closet, I found the suit I wore at Dad's funeral, still smelling faintly of rain and incense. My knees went weak for a second, and I hated Kendra for timing her experiment near the raw edge of my mourning. Renee handed me a bottle of water and said, "Keep going." I did, because stopping would be surrender. That settled it. No debates. Kendra's mother, Patrice, called from Cleveland and opened with prayer the way she opened most arguments. She said marriage was a covenant, and I was abandoning Kendra during a hard season. I listened until she paused for breath. Then I said, "Patrice, your daughter asked for freedom and used it. I am not punishing her. I am protecting myself." Patrice replied that Kendra was confused, that I should not let grief decide. I told her my grief did not invite another man onto our porch. My voice stayed level, and the line went quiet. That settled it. Alone, I visited my father's grave on a windy afternoon, the cemetery paths edged with snow. I brought no flowers, just a small screwdriver he once gave me, the kind he kept in his shirt pocket. Standing there, I admitted something I had avoided. My marriage had been my shelter, and losing it felt like losing him again. But Dad had never confused shelter with surrender. I remembered his rule. If a door keeps slamming, stop putting your fingers in it. I set the screwdriver on the headstone for a moment, then pocketed it and walked back to the car, lighter. I stayed steady. A message from Jalen arrived on a Monday night, formal and cautious. He wrote that he did not mean to disrespect me, that Kendra told him we were effectively done. I stared at it, surprised by a burn behind my ribs. Part of me wanted to blame him, because blame is simpler than mourning. Instead, I replied with one sentence. "You were invited into a home that was still occupied. Do not contact me again." Then I blocked the number. 10 minutes later, Kendra called from a line. I let it ring until it stopped, and I went to bed without answers. I stayed quiet. Kendra left a voicemail that sounded rehearsed, gentle in places where anger usually lived. She said she understood why I was upset, that she only needed me to listen 5 minutes. I played it once for Dana, then deleted it from my phone and kept a saved copy in my case file. The deletion felt symbolic, like removing a picture from a frame. Later, in Renee's kitchen, the kettle screamed and Renee asked, "Do you miss her or the idea of her?" I did not answer right away. I missed my old self, the man who assumed love meant safety. I took notes. I kept breathing. Dana scheduled mediation in a downtown office. She told me to expect swings and offers that change when you read them twice. I brought a folder of statements, photos, and the inventory list Renee helped me create. Kendra arrived with a new haircut and a new softness, eyes glossy as if tears were currency. She sat across from me and whispered, "I did not think you would really leave." I kept my gaze on the mediator's notepad. I said, "I did not think you would really invite him in." Her mouth opened, then closed, like a door meeting its frame. I did not chase. In the first session, Kendra asked for a month to reset, as if time itself could scrub choices clean. She said she had cut off Jalen and wanted to come home. Dana slid my written position across the table. Divorce filing, equitable split, no joint debt, no surprise withdrawals. Kendra's eyes flashed. She told the mediator I was cold. I wanted to laugh at the irony. I build safety systems so strangers get home alive. I was not cold. I was done negotiating my dignity. I did not reply. I kept breathing. I drove home slowly for the rest. Then, in the caucus, the mediator asked Kendra why she chose a break. She hesitated, then said she wanted to know if she still mattered to someone. That sounded like an excuse for wearing honesty. She admitted she had been texting Jalen for weeks, calling it harmless until it was not. She said she felt guilty after I left, but she kept going. I stared at the seam and felt shame for denial, not because I caused it, but because I labeled the signs as stress. When she asked if we could start over, I said, "No, not like this. Not here." Again, during a break in mediation, I stepped into the hallway and heard an elevator chime. A man in a suit laughed, while a janitor pushed a card on the tile. Ordinary life continued around my collapse, and that steadied me. I opened my notebook and wrote a list of things I would not do: plead, bargain for basic respect, or accept blame for her choice. Then I wrote one thing I would do: finish the paperwork cleanly. When Dana asked if I was okay, I said, "I am clear." That word felt like a switch turning from flashing red to solid green. I did not chase. The mediator proposed a split: sell the duplex, divide proceeds, separate retirement accounts, and close joint credit. Kendra objected to selling because she did not want to downsize. I said I would buy out her share if the appraisal was fair and the refinance was immediate. Her eyes narrowed, surprised that I had numbers ready. Years in engineering taught me to prepare before failure becomes public. She asked for my father's record player, calling it sentimental for her too. I said no without raising my voice. She sighed, and the mediator wrote it down as if it were weather. I kept my tone neutral. Kendra leaned forward and reminded everyone she had driven me to the hospital and sat with my father when I could not get off shift. Her voice softened, and for a second I saw the woman who once left notes in my lunch bag. I did not deny what she did for my family. I said, "You showed up then, and I am grateful. You also chose to step outside this marriage, and I am finished." The mediator asked if reconciliation was possible. I answered before Kendra could inhale. No. The speed of it startled her and steadied me too. I did not beg. After hours, we had a draft agreement and a date for final signatures. Kendra kept asking for a conversation without lawyers, a walk by the lake, something private. I said any necessary conversation could be written and reviewed. She looked at me as if I had turned into a stranger, but I had stopped performing hope. Outside, the sky cleared to pale blue. Dana asked if I wanted lunch. I said yes, because feeding myself was respectful. We ate soup at a small cafe, and I noticed my hands had stopped trembling and my shoulders lowered after the storm. I chose clarity. A week later, Terrence told me Jalen had stopped showing up to Kendra's events and had returned to Chicago. The news did not comfort me the way revenge stories claim it should. It only confirmed what I already knew. I had been treated like a placeholder. Kendra texted again without anger. She wrote, "I made a mistake. I do not want to lose our life." I felt the instinct to fix things, then remembered the porch light and the laughter. I forwarded the message to Dana and went to the laundromat. I washed uniforms and watched them. I stayed quiet. Sunday came bright on packed snow, and I went to my father's church for the first time since the funeral. The choir warmed up, and coffee drifted from the fellowship hall. I sat in the back, hoping to be unnoticed. Mid-service, Kendra slipped into a pew and scanned for me. My throat tightened, not with longing, but with dread of being cornered. After the benediction, she said, "Can we talk outside?" I said, "Not today. Email Dana." She whispered that I was cruel. I replied, "I am clear," and I walked away. Then I sat in the car, listening to the heater. I kept moving forward. The refinance cleared in early spring, and I moved into an apartment where buses hissed at stops. The duplex stayed in my name, but the rooms felt haunted by old conversations, so I left. Renee helped me pack the kitchen, wrapping plates in newspaper while the radio repeated warnings. In the new place, I set my tools first, then my father's record player, then one photo of him smiling in a winter coat. I left the walls bare. That night, I ate takeout at the counter and listened to neighbors argue through thin drywall. It was not peaceful, but it was mine, and I slept better. I waited. I started therapy at a community clinic behind a grocery store, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and patient silence. My counselor, Ms. Whitaker, asked how my father's death and my marriage collapse overlapped. I tried to answer like an engineer, listing causes and effects. She stopped me and said, "Feelings are not defects to troubleshoot." That sentence irritated me, which told me it mattered. Over weeks, I learned to name what I avoided: humiliation, abandonment, and fear. Love was not earned by usefulness. Naming that brought air back. I took notes. One evening, the record player would not start, so I opened the back with my father's screwdriver. Dust puffed out, and the smell took me to his basement workshop. Tucked behind the motor housing was a folded paper I had never seen. It was my father's handwriting, neat and stubborn. He wrote, "Do not let anyone call your boundaries selfish. If they require you to shrink, it is not love." I sat on the floor with the note, laughed once at the timing, then wiped my eyes. I taped it inside my kitchen cabinet, where I reached for glasses. Daily, I let it sit, the night before final signatures. Kendra sent an email with bullet points, as if emotion could be organized. She apologized, then listed what she believed I did wrong. Working too much, withdrawing after Dad died, not planning dates. She ended by asking for one more chance. I read it and noticed what was missing. Any ownership of choosing her ex, Ms. Whitaker, told me accountability sounds like specifics and change, not summaries and promises. I replied with 2 sentences. "I accept your apology. I am proceeding with divorce. Take care." After sending it, I sat and let the quiet stand. I kept my tone neutral. Final signatures happened on a rainy Friday that turned sidewalks into mirrors. Kendra waited near lobby plants, hands clasped like prayer. When she saw me, she said, "Malcolm, please, just look at me." I looked, and I saw someone who wanted relief more than repair. In the conference room, the mediator slid documents across the table. Kendra started to talk about love and tests and timing. I picked up my pen and signed each page where Dana pointed, one after another, without commentary. It took less than 3 minutes. She blinked. Done. I chose restraint. Outside under the awning, Kendra followed me and held out my wedding ring in her palm. She said she had kept it safe, like that proved loyalty. I took my ring from my pocket and placed it beside hers, metal touching metal for the last time. I did not curse or raise my voice. I told her I hoped she found what she was searching for, but she would not search for it through me again. She asked where she would go. I said, "That is not my decision anymore." Then I walked to my car and drove away. Quietly, I stayed steady. Word traveled fast, because people love a clean headline more than a messy truth. Some friends stopped inviting me to gatherings, afraid of awkwardness. Others messaged that they always knew Kendra was selfish, which felt late and pointless. I learned to accept support without turning it into a courtroom. When Terrence asked if I wanted updates about Kendra, I said no. I did not need news to stay committed to my boundary. I focused on small tasks: cooking rice, washing work boots, paying bills, calling Renee, and walking after dinner as streetlights clicked on, reading my father's note nightly again. I kept moving forward. Summer brought season at the hospital, and Kendra's name started disappearing from invitations. Renee told me that board members had asked questions about her judgment and her behavior. I did not celebrate it. I understood consequences as physics. Actions create reactions when you wish they would not. Kendra sent one last text. "You are ruining me." I felt calm. I had not ruined her. She had gambled and lost. I deleted it and went to work early to inspect a safety panel. In the quiet depot, the smell of oil and metal reminded me I could still build things that worked. I stayed quiet. I ran into Kendra at a corner store near my apartment, both of us reaching for the same eggs. She looked thinner, eyes tired in a way makeup cannot disguise. For a second, I felt the old urge to rescue her, and I hated that urge because it was habit, not love. She whispered my name like it might reopen the past. I nodded once. She said, "I did not think it would end like this." I answered, "It ended where you steered it." I paid and walked out into warm air, surprised I could feel sadness without negotiating my return. Alone, I let it sit. Work improved. My mind stopped splitting itself between hope and dread. I trained a new technician named Everett, a quiet man who asked careful questions and wrote everything down. Teaching him reminded me that clarity is not cruelty. It is kindness that saves time and pain. One night shift, we tested a shutdown sequence, and the alarm sounded as designed. I thought about my marriage and why it failed. We had no shared protocol for respect, only moods. Driving home, I passed a late-night diner and remembered Kendra's phrase about testing love. Love does not need tests that require betrayal to grade them. I did not chase. Renee invited me to a backyard cookout with folding chairs. I almost declined, then remembered isolation is a liar. Someone grilled chicken, and a neighbor argued about baseball with a kid on a scooter. Renee asked if I was dating. I laughed, surprised by the sound. I told her I was learning how to be alone without feeling abandoned. She nodded and said that is real work. As dusk settled, she handed me a plate wrapped in foil and said, "Eat tomorrow." The care felt like proof that life still offers you normalcy if you accept it. I kept breathing. "Please." A small box arrived at my apartment with Kendra's handwriting on the label. Inside were photos from our first vacation, a ticket stub from a jazz show, and the cufflinks my father gave me. A note said, "I am sorry. I want us back." My hands shook, not from longing, but from anger at being pulled backward by objects. I called Dana. She said keep what is yours and return the rest without a message. I kept the cufflinks, sealed the photos, and mailed them back. The postal stamp hit the paper with a dull thud, and I kept walking. I chose clarity. On weekends, I started sailing lessons on Lake Michigan because my father said I needed a hobby that did not pay me. The instructor, Mr. Gaines, spoke in short commands and laughed at my stiff posture. When I pulled a rope wrong, the sail snapped and the boat turned, and my heart jumped. He said, "Do not panic. Read the wind. Adjust." Out on the water, the skyline looked distant. Grief stayed in my chest, but it did not steer. After class, I sat on a bench, listened to gulls, and ate a hot dog from a stand in peace. I kept moving forward. The divorce became final when the judge signed off without ceremony. I did not attend. Dana handled it and called afterward while I was tightening bolts on a panel at work. She said, "You are legally free." I thanked her and stood still for a long moment. There was no celebration, just a quiet click of completion. At lunch, I ate tacos on a curb and watched commuters hurry past. I thought about Kendra's break. It did not test love. It tested character and tolerance. My tolerance had changed. I texted Renee and Terrence thanks, then went back to work. I stayed steady. One night, I ate at a diner near the tracks, bright lights on chrome, and a train horn in the distance. A couple argued in a booth, and I heard my old life in their voices. I wrote in my notebook what happened, what I felt, what I needed. What happened was betrayal. What I felt was humiliation and grief. What I needed was respect and rest. Plain words made it less mystical. I did not need revenge to feel whole. I needed alignment between my values and my actions. Boundaries were not punishment. They were instructions for how to love me without hurting me, and kept them. I went quiet. Months later, Patrice mailed me a card. She said Kendra had moved in with an aunt and was trying to rebuild. Patrice did not ask me to return. She thanked me for being kind during my father's illness. I sat at my counter and felt something loosen. Forgiveness did not mean access. It meant letting go of the story where I stayed trapped as the wrong man. I wrote Patrice back and thanked her. I did not mention Kendra. Then I walked to the lakefront and watched the sunset. The water kept moving, and I let my breathing match it. I waited. People still ask what happened. I tell them my wife wanted a break to test our love, and she used the freedom to return to her past. I do not list dates or details. I do not perform pain for an audience. I say I ended it because I respect myself, and because grief already took enough from me. Some expect bitterness. They do not get it. They get an answer and a changed subject. In my work, when a system shows a critical fault, you shut it down before it spreads. In my marriage, I finally applied the same principle. I do not hate Kendra. I hate what I tolerated. I stayed steady. On the anniversary of my father's death, I visited the cemetery with a thermos and no dread. I told him about the divorce without drama. I said I did not save my marriage, but I saved my integrity, and that mattered. Wind moved through the trees, and I imagined him nodding. Before leaving, I touched the small screwdriver in my pocket and thought of his note waiting in my cabinet. Then I drove home, turned on the record player, and let music fill the room. Proof that peace can be loud enough. It drowned out the old urge to beg. I kept breathing. If you are grieving, loss makes you crave what is familiar, even when it hurts. A break with no boundaries is not a reset. It is permission for someone who wants out. The hardest part was admitting that love cannot be proven by tolerating disrespect. Grief did not make me weak, but it made me vulnerable to excuses. So I built a boundary the way I build safety systems. Clear limits and documented choices. Accountability is not a speech. It is behavior repeated. When my wife chose her ex, I chose myself without theatrics. My job was self-respect. That was enough. The takeaway is simple. Set terms before you agree to distance, and do not accept a situation where you carry the risk. Watch how someone treats your grief. It reveals their character. If they ask for freedom, let them have it. But remove your access and your safety net. Do not stalk, do not beg, do not lecture. Make one statement. Put support with you and follow through. I did not win by humiliating my wife. I won by refusing to abandon myself. That is what ended it before she could blink, and that is what kept me standing afterward. Today, the Yendi. If this story hits you, share it with someone who keeps explaining disrespect like it is a misunderstanding. And before you go, drop one sentence. What boundary would you set immediately if you were in this position? I read every comment.